my pleasure to be here today. Looking at the agenda closer, Peter really made a huge mistake slotting me between a member of the board of the STB and Tony Hatch. I mean, really, what? It's not where I belong, but I'm happy to be here. And for those of you that attended the 2023 conference, I remoted in from the American Shortline conference. Those two things happened at the same time that year, and talked about this bridge opening, Chris. So you're right, we've been talking about it a long time. We're talking about regulatory reforms and slowing things down. This bridge did burn in 2008, it burned again in 2009 in Presidio, that really finished it off. There's even a picture in here, I'll show y'all in a minute. And it took us 11 years to get the permits to rebuild the bridge, 11 years. My first month on the job in May of 18, we'd just gotten the last required permit. At the time, Congressman Hurd out of San Antonio helped push that over the line. And we had the bridge rebuilt in 11 months, but it took us 11 years to get that point. And I'll go through a little bit more of the history of that as we go through here. For those of you that aren't familiar with Texas Pacifico, I'll talk a little, just very briefly. We're part of Grupo Mexico Transportes, which is the GMXT. Grupo Mexico, there are 5 companies in that transportation division. The biggest and the most well-known is Ferromex. Then you have Ferrosur, you have EMEX, Texas Pacifico, and then the Florida East Coast is the 5th entity that makes up GMXT today. So, very historic line. I'm sure many of you know, probably even maybe more of the history than I know about it, but this was a gentleman, Arthur Stilwell, envisioned building the shortest route to the Pacific from the center of the country. In 1901, the first stake was placed in Emporia, Kansas, and that's a shorter distance to the Pacific going on this route down to the port of Topolobampo in Mexico than it is to going to Southern California by several hundred miles. And so his vision was to create this line, and we operate a good chunk of it through the southwest part of the state. For those of you, this map hopefully helps for those of you that might not know it. It's the green line there that runs from San Angelo Junction, kind of over by Brownwood, actually closer to Coleman, Texas, and then runs down to the border. It really pretty much very closely parallels US Highway 67 from coming out of Southwest Fort Worth going all the way down to the border. And that's what this rail line follows. You can see the history timeline here. This line was in threat of being abandoned and scrapped, and the state stepped in really and saved it. And then in a little before 2001, there were a call for people to step forward who might want to operate the line. Grupo Mexico was the only one that raised their hand. They actually stood up Texas Pacifico for this express purpose, and that's how we were born. And we've been operating the line since then. On our north and eastern terminus, we interchange with the BNSF and with our friends over here, the Fort Worth and Western, who are with us today as well. And so they are bridge carrier to UP traffic in the DFW area and any CPKC traffic. And then we do partnership stuff where there's traffic that just stays on the line between us and Fort Worth and Western as well. So a good partner to have as we kind of complete that route. There was a map I saw earlier today that really highlights, and if you look at the pretty nice 45-degree angle between Chihuahua, Mexico, and the DFW Metroplex, we feel like as we get to this point that we've been building towards for so long and open that bridge, that's going to really be the sweet spot for us initially, particularly in the early days of reestablishing rail service across a line in a crossing that's been closed for 20 years almost. So we're basically starting from zero again, I think you could say, in a lot of ways. It is 385 miles from end to end, and we also have 11 miles of, I don't know if this, yeah, it's got a little clicker. There's 11 miles right here, kind of in the middle at Alpine, where we have 11 miles of trackage rights over the UP between Alpine and Paisano Pass. So that exists out there. So this, 25 years in, I kind of categorize this as the early years. In the early years, from 2001 to 2011, we started operations on a line. You could walk faster than you could run a train on it because it was scared to death of derailments, and we kind of limped along and started physically and literally rebuilding the line in a lot of ways. But there was a lot of red on any piece of paper that you ever looked at in terms of returns or cost and everything associated with that line. In those years, it was just a big pool of red always. This picture here is a picture of the bridge after the second fire in '09. And so, that was kind of what I guess, getting close to the end of that phase of the early years right there. At that time, there were only about 300 to 400 rail cars a year going over the bridge, so it wasn't a real robust crossing in and of itself at the time. But nonetheless, there was an ability to move cars over the line there until that fire rendered it impassable. The next phase was 2012 to 19. I categorize that as the northern white sand years. This is a great example of just being at the right place at the right time. And as the shale boom took off and horizontal drilling and then fracking came with that, here came the northern white sand. And we were beautifully positioned to be able to take advantage of that boom. And kind of just about as fast as it showed up, it kind of disappeared to all the in-basin sand. My first month on the job in May of 18, we moved about 4,250 rail cars of sand out of about 6,500 rail cars for the month. That month, still for the first 25 years of existence, is the single highest volume month we've ever had in the 25-year history. So way to start, right? First month on the job, and it's all been downhill from there. And I'm not joking about that. It's really true. But in that same time frame in 2018, you had one sand mine in the Permian Basin. You fast forward 24 months, and there were about 26 sand mines. So about one a month for 2 years came online in the Permian. COVID hit, oil went to negative $40 a barrel, and the bloodbath was on, right? And when you're moving 92 to 94% of your product mix is a single product, and it goes away like that, out in this part of the state where we are, you just don't recover from that. I mean, we never really have. To put it in context, I mentioned the 6,500 carloads or so that month of May of 2018. In the years since, in the 2020 years, that kind of transitioned us into the Grin and Barrett years. We've been moving just not much above on an annual basis what we were moving in our peak years of 2017 to 2019. And that's what we've shrunk down to that size over the last 5 or 6 years. And so it's been really tough getting through. The picture here, the two on the bottom, are the Grin and Barrett years, because we spent a tremendous amount of money in really starting in 2018. Ferromex rebuilt the part of the bridge on the Mexican side of the river, and about the time we started in 2019, they were finishing that side up. And then you can see the pictures here of the bridge with the gate, and this is a bridge. This is a picture from the levee looking south, so that mountain's in Mexico, looking towards this gate down here as it gets closer to the river, the actual river. But we spent a lot of money in those years anticipating the fact that we could really get that bridge put into use very quickly. Unfortunately, about $40 million went into the line between Chihuahua and Alpine, Texas over a 3 or 4 year period between 18 and 2021 in preparation of getting going again and ramping up. And here we are in 2026, and we still haven't put a single rail car over that bridge, not one. So hence the grin and bear it years. And then the good news is here we are in 2026, approaching mid-year, high level of confidence that we will see the first cargo over that bridge in the very few, I think within the next 2 to 3, 4 months as we start testing. And so we'll move on into a more exciting story. And forgive me for doing this, but I just can't. I have been spending a lot of time in Presidio, Texas, that I never set out to do in my lifetime or knew that I would be. All that said, phenomenal people, great community to be in down there on the border. But you can see, I just put a timeline and some pictures here of the development as we've been focused on. This is one of the several projects that are underway. And our landlord, I kind of glossed over the fact that the South Orient Line, we're just the operator. The state of Texas owns the rail line that we operate on. TxDOT's here today, and Don Franks is with us, and he'll be talking to y'all in the morning about some of the broader TxDOT programs through the rail division. But they're who we work with, our landlord and our partner particularly on this project, but really everything that we do. And so TxDOT's managing a couple of elements of what's going on in Presidio right now as we speak. We have a role in this, and that's more of the pictures that I'm showing and trying to see a particular project through. And then a fourth contract that's also open right now is the company that built the X-ray system and will be has already started installing that. So it's a culmination of these things coming together that allow us to start running this train traffic. So you see there in July of last year. Again, similar view of the picture here with the bridge down there. This is the levee that protects town from flooding. There's another bridge right here. You can see this area where we took out about 320 feet of track, and then they leveled out a drill deck. What happened there is all of these piers, there were 62 in this part of the project. I think an adjacent building, this building over here, has an additional 20 or 30 piers, maybe more than that. This deck here is where the X-ray system will be located. The trains will run through right here. So that drill deck that gets cut out here, that's going to actually be replaced starting next week. And then we'll put the track back in place. This will house the X-ray system and all of the components that go with the scanning, and this will be the control center for that, mostly electronics, but office space for CBP staff to operate the system there. So that got us through February. I think February 27th they poured the second part of this slab. There were, I think it's 550 cubic yards of cement poured on it's about a 7,500 square foot space, about 15 feet in the air. So it's quite an undertaking. And for those of you that have not been out to Presidio, Texas, it's way out there. So if one thing goes down or if you run out of something, it's not a good thing to happen, right? Really, really tough place to construct and pull off a project the size that we're working on. This one shows soon after the deck was poured, all the rebar that went up. And by May 5th, we had this big building, or the walls of it. Here we have a picture from a few weeks ago. Again, this is where it's starting to come together better. You can see this is where the trains will run through that area. This building here will house the scanning equipment, and then the column back over there on the other side, which is the opposite. That tower right there is the I guess what catches the radiation and such from the scanning that comes out of that building. But at this point, we've got catwalks in place, fabricated stairways. They call it the stairway to heaven in there. That just kind of keeps going to the top of this thing. We've got generators, so stuff's happening really fast right now. A lot of headway. The roof, I was on a call this morning. Trusses are up. Roof's going in this week on the rest of this building. So we're moving really, really nicely there. The timing is what everybody always asks about. If I had $5 for every time I've been asked when this bridge would open and we'd start, I could have funded this project myself maybe. I've been wrong every time for years. So one of these days, I've always said, as long as I keep answering the question, I'm going to get it right one of these days. But I'm going to go back to before I get to that one. Oh, let me see here. The installation has begun on the X-ray system. We'll move through a phase of where there's testing single rail cars just back and forth. That'll actually transition into a little bit more complex scenario, and ultimately there will be more of kind of a live traffic scenario under a testing protocol to really get this system commissioned and dialed in and ready for use. The CBP, the local officials, Customs and Border Protection, are very adamant about this system. It's got to be fully installed and operational before they allow commercial traffic to begin. And that's all good and fine and dandy, but as the people at Smith's Detection reminded them the other day, if you want it fully installed and operational, we're going to have to run live traffic over this thing to get it going. I mean, to be able to scan a 100-car train and make sense out of it, you got to throw a 100-car train at it. And so there will be an arc here in the coming months, we think starting in late summer with the first testing, going into the fall to go into live traffic. So real excited about that timeline. For me at this point, I don't really care, when's the first train? Well, there's going to be a lot of ways to define what that first train is. Had a question earlier about, do y'all have a date for the grand opening? Fortunately, Don and I had that conversation 2 weeks ago. All of a sudden, these things that we've been pushing off and saying that'll come at a later time are now things that really have to do with opening this thing up, are now coming to the fore, and are things that we're starting to think about and plan in more detail. So very exciting on that front in the way that we can really touch this thing. And then lastly, I'll just mention real quick, I always like to give a plug locally. Our corporate office and where I live and work is in San Angelo, Texas. So we're on the northern end of the line, closer to San Angelo Junction. Our main rail yard is right here. And I just like to kind of let people know about the San Angelo Rail Park. It's owned and operated by the South Plains and La Mesa Railroad. They developed this in partnership with the Economic Development Corporation in San Angelo, and are continuing to develop this. We feel like this will be a good asset and something that'll be quite useful and needed and a lot of interest in, particularly when we start seeing some of that traffic come over the bridge. I didn't touch on this, but I know people probably got it in their minds very quickly on kind of products as we think about opening. We see grain kind of flowing in both directions. Metal, same thing, scrap metal maybe going south, some finished products coming northbound, cement coming northbound. Rail cars is an opportunity for us that we're talking with some folks about. So, we've got some exciting times ahead of us. More premium service type stuff, intermodal, automotive, those are things that are further away. That's not something that we'll be touching early on. Not to say that won't be in our future somewhere down the line, but not at the outset. So I think with that, I did have a little video. I don't know if they can pop up real quick, but it's just a quick drone video that shows kind of what the development looks like. This was taken, I guess, last week, if y'all want to start that. And I guess while we're watching that, if there's any questions, or do we have time for questions now? There's no audio with this, so it's just something we can kind of look at.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Dan. We definitely have time for questions. I had two prepared. One you took away from me by talking about the new markets you have available. So in your presentation earlier, you talked about being captive to the sand, but now it looks like you got a much better business model with lots of new opportunities, right?
Yeah, I've been waiting for that for a long time, and having a much more diverse product mix will serve us well, and will take a lot of pressure off of just being so dependent on one sector for sure.
All right, well, that takes me to my second question, and you know, the product that I'm most interested in and have been for some 30 years doing design work is passengers. And you know, Chihuahua is 4 million people. You talked about it being able to link Dallas, Fort Worth. When you designed or worked with CBP on the facility, did you talk about any opportunity for passenger rail service long-term, make sure not precluding that, and make sure I don't get all messed up going through that x-ray machine if you haul me one day?
Well, to be frank with you, we haven't talked about that as an option. I get that question asked a fair amount of times. There's still a lot of people around that remember times of taking the train down to Chihuahua and through the Copper Canyon, which we know Ferromex still operates the Chippy, you know, down through Copper Canyon as a tourist train. But we haven't. You know, there's so many things that have been so important just to get to this point and to get open for commercial business that's really not something that we've talked about. So I do know that this scanning system is, you know, this is the, you know, as modern of a system and as advanced system as there is. And I know there's an ability in terms, they've talked a little bit about it, just in terms of people manning the locomotives for the testing purposes, and later when we're doing it like they do at any other crossings where, you know, they're not zapping those folks with the rays. So there's ways of turning that on and off very precisely for particular cars, so it might not preclude, you know, I guess there would be a way to do that, and then there would have to be some other type of inspection mechanism in place from more of a visual if there's people on there or something. But it's really not been any part of any conversations we've had to this point.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And approximately, do you know what speed the train will be able to move through that X-ray facility?
Well, the X-ray system is capable of handling rail cars up to about 12 miles an hour. The thing is, you saw the proximity to the bridge, and we're not going to be operating international crews or anything like that at the outset. We're not going to have that time constraint and pressures of having to worry about those things. So that train's going to be at either from a dead standstill coming north, so it's just going to get going, or it's going to be braking to a stopping point on that bridge for crews to change, right? So we're not going to be blazing through there. I don't know that we ever will, frankly. The rail yard is, so this facility is the primary inspection facility for northbound trains, which is what Customs and Border Protection is charged with worrying about, what's coming into the country, right? That's their primary charge versus what's leaving the country on southbound, right? So this is the primary inspection. You see the curve, and 2 miles from where this point is where the rail yard is. And that's where another building is being built right now for CBP. That's our secondary inspection facility, and so there's a dock there if they need to get on. There'll be other infrastructure there, canine units, holding cells, things of that nature at that secondary CBP office in the rail yard 2 miles away. So again, if you're at a standstill and you're going through this, you're going to be going, you know, they need it to be going, I think, 3 miles an hour at least. It's got to have some speed with it too. You can't just be inching along. But, you know, we would be not blowing it out, you know, right off the bat, because if we've got if they got to pull a car out or take a closer look 2 miles up the road at the station, it's going to be till we get out of town and pass secondary inspection before trains start taking on speed, you know, really.
Okay, great. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions? All right, well, if there's no other questions, Stan, I really commend you on the great work, and I'm very excited to see that it's finally going to be happening for real.
As Don Frank said this morning, it's been, he's the 5th rail division director that's worked on this, and a lot of people at Texas Pacifico, at Ferromex. I mean, it's been a long time in the coming, but we appreciate the opportunity to share where we are today and are excited about the future. So thank you all for
All right,
having
well,
me.
thank you very much.
Appreciate it.